Good evening everyone and welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers Cyclone video update tonight, the 30th of April 2015. My name's Chris Nitzo. This update is sponsored by a major sponsor, Campbell Scientific Australia, when measurements matter. And well, oh well, haven't we finished the cyclone season off with a bang? We've got a very active weather pattern here across WA. We've got severe tropical cyclone Quang has intensified rapidly over the past 48 hours from a tropical low to a Category 4 cyclone. It is moving towards the coast in a southeasterly direction to around about 15 to 20 kilometers an hour. Across to the east of the continent, we've got a high pressure system here, very strong, pushing some very moist winds, not quite onto the coast at the moment because we've got a trough system just offshore, but as that trough system pushes onshore, we'll see an increase in that rainfall. So at the moment, we're seeing fairly moderate to heavy falls across southeastern Queensland, but at this stage, we're expecting to see those falls increase dramatically once that trough system pushes right onto the coast. And that should happen overnight tonight and into tomorrow. The weather zone chart shows this beautifully. Tomorrow we're going to see tropical cyclone Quang moving in a southeasterly direction, approaching the northwest coast of WA in a weakening state, I might add, a very much weakening state. And also we've got the subtropical low located here right on the southeast Queensland coastline, creating some very heavy falls of rain. By Saturday night, we're expecting to see tropical cyclone Quang, now a tropical low, and pushing onto the Gascoyne coastline. And we're also expecting to see the east coast low here around the southeast corner of Queensland starting to move southwards towards New South Wales and remaining reasonably weak. Alright, so most of this update will be devoted to the real cyclone, which is Cyclone Quang, but we will spend a couple of minutes at the end talking about the potential rainfall occurring from the east coast low. Satellite imagery is certainly impressive for tropical cyclone Quang. Look at this beautiful looking eye system here, and it's pushing now fairly rapidly in this southeasterly motion. There is nothing to take this off course now. Once it moves southeast, it will now continue to do so almost in a direct line here. So we're looking at a situation of a landfall, most likely west of Onslow, more likely around the Exmouth or further to the south towards Carnarvon. I would suggest Exmouth to Coral Bay would be the favoured area at this point in time. Now, the system is at the moment looking extremely well and extremely healthy. However, the environmental conditions are rapidly deteriorating to its west. Now, let's have a look at that on the SIMS analysis. Okay, so right now the eye of the cyclone is located right where my cursor is, right in there. Now, what we're going to overlay over the next minute or two is a couple of key parameters in the environment that are going to create this weakening effect of this system. Now, already on the satellite imagery, what we can see is this crisp outline of cloud out here to the west. So this crisp outline tells us very, very clearly that there is a lot of dry air here in the atmosphere. Now, that dry air is not into the center of circulation yet, so it hasn't impacted the circulation yet. But when we look at such a crisp outline of the cloud, the outflow cloud of the system, this is not cloud coming into the system, this is cloud moving away from the system. What we can see just by looking at an infrared satellite imagery right there is that there is a hell of a lot of dry air about to come in towards this system. Now, if we look at that in a little bit more detail and have a look at the total precipitable water estimate, once again, let me just go back here. We've got, this is that crisp layer of cloud out here to the west. This is the total precipitable water imagery, and you can see the very dry air that's trying to get into the circulation here. So if we were to try and plot this area of dry air, it would be coming in here and trying to wrap into the circulation. Now, stopping that from happening, we have this plume of moisture. And this plume of moisture coming from the north, and you can see it right in here into the center of the circulation. So while it's attached to that plume of moisture, this dry air is going to find it very difficult to get into the center of circulation. Now, obviously, as the system moves further to the south, it will find it harder to get this moisture coming in, or advecting, what we call advecting, in from the north and into the center of circulation. The other thing that's important to note is that because we've got an upper level trough in behind it as well now, we've got a situation where a lot of this dry air is pushing in this direction, and that is the general prevailing wind now for this system. And so what we're seeing is this advection of drier air pushing in from the west. And then so we've got this battle at the moment going on between this dry air, which is trying to push in right into the center of the system, and we've got more dry air in behind it, and we've got this little bit of moisture that's pushing right into the center at the moment, trying to get shoved away by this dry air coming in to take its place. Now these two will battle it out over the next 24 to 36 hours, but eventually the dry air will win. If I've overlaid the track forecast here now on top of sea surface temperatures, just to show you, even though it is very late in the season, the sea surface temperatures off the coast of northwest WA are A-OK for development of even up to a Category 5 tropical cyclone. So there's absolutely nothing stopping it in terms of oceanic sea surface temperatures. So the system will not die because of cooler ocean water on the way to the coast. Now I've overlaid the actual prevailing wind direction. So this is the steering level flow, and what we can see on the steering level flow is that we've got a fairly strong flow here at around about 15 or so knots, 15 to 20 knots even, pushing the system into the south-southeast, and that flow is not going to change anytime soon. So there's not going to be a sudden shift to the east, and there's not going to be a sudden shift to the south or west. It's pretty well set in stone now. The flow is strong, and the flow will not change in between now and landfall. Now, of even greater importance than the dry air that's trying to push in is this vertical wind shear, this area of changing direction of winds with height and changing speeds more than anything of winds with height. Now what we've got at the moment, the system lies in an area of around about 15 knots of vertical wind shear. That will increase early tomorrow into tomorrow afternoon to about 20 to 25 knots of vertical wind shear, and then as it pushes in towards the state, that will further increase to about 20 to 30 and then 30 to 40 knots. Now bearing in mind of course that this is the current levels of wind shear. At the moment we have an upstream upper trough, and that will push eastwards as well, and so what we'll start to see is that those increased wind shear values will push into the area or into the forecast track. So as a cyclone moves this way, that increasing shear will push that way, as push in towards the cyclone itself. So while the situation shows moderate to high levels of vertical wind shear, I think you'll find that the actual shear the system will encounter, particularly when it gets close to the coast, will just rip it into shreds as it makes its landfall. And it's probably going to be touch and go because the wind shear increase will come just at the right moment for residents of the northwest coast. At least that is the plan at this stage. Alright, so let's take a look at the computer models. The computer models are showing a general track here to the southeast, pretty well set in stone, and you can see that there might be a slight eastward shift here on the GFS forecast ensemble, but overall we're looking at a landfall anywhere more than likely north of Carnarvon now. Around Coral Bay seems to be a favoured area, and around Exmouth seems to be a favoured area. So there seems to be two little spots here of concentration, and then a little bit of a gap in between them on the GFS forecast model. So I guess it depends if it does this little eastward shift here in the next 12 hours. If it does that eastward shift, we're probably looking at a direct hit on Exmouth. Now, the other thing to note is if it does that little eastward shift, there is a slightly increased chance that this is going to hit the coast as a very weak cyclone. If it doesn't do that slight eastward shift and just follows the general prevailing wind direction to the south-southeast, then it would stand only a very low chance of remaining a cyclone on impact onto the coast. The CMC forecast model, not as tightly grouped here, but once again you can see fairly obviously that the system's going to move to the south-southeast, and I would take this outlier out of the equation if I was a betting man, because I don't see that east to east northeast shift expected on one of the computer model guidances there to even have any remote chance of coming off. So looking at the European strike probability diagram, we can see just generally a very, very fast decline of the system starting from around about early tomorrow. We're going to see that dry air and that vertical shear increase dramatically, and we can see that in general the system will have a outside chance, probably about a 30 to 40% chance of remaining a tropical cyclone, and might I say a very weak tropical cyclone as it hits the coast. At this stage, the favoured still is the favoured scenario for it to become a low pressure system rather than a tropical cyclone. Now that does not mean, by the way, that we're not going to see gales on the coast. So even though the system might cross the coast as a low or a very marginal cyclone, we're still very likely, or more than likely, going to see gales on that Gascoyne and maybe far western Pilbara coastline. And that is why the Bureau of Meteorology have issued a tropical cyclone warning for the area between Coral Bay and Onslow, because even though the system's not going to hit Onslow, it could still create some gale force winds, maybe even some damaging wind gusts in this area. So winds maybe up to 120, gusting up to about 120 kilometers an hour possible in this area. But as I mentioned to you, the chances of it actually hitting as a tropical cyclone are still only in the low to moderate levels, with the overall favoured scenario on computer guidance is that it will remain below cyclone status on landfall. But that could change, and so we'll have another update tomorrow morning for subscribers and tomorrow night for the general public. By tomorrow night, we'll have an excellent idea as to how that shear is starting to impact the system. You can see here by 2 p.m. tomorrow, WA time, it's already expected to start weakening. By 2 a.m. on Saturday morning, the system will be a marginal cyclone at best, according to the Bureau of Meteorology track forecast. But once again, even though it's a marginal system here, it could still be creating gales on the coast, and that's why we've got the cyclone warning. So I hope that's clarified why the cyclone warning's there. We're not expecting a Category 4 cyclone to hit Onslow or Exmouth or anything like that, nothing of the sort. But we are expecting a weakening cyclone to be likely to produce some type of gale force winds with damaging gusts in this region. The Joint Typhoon Warning Centre track forecast, the latest on that, as the system weakening beginning overnight tonight at getting down to about 100 knots, which is still a significant cyclone. So we're still talking about a Category 3 system by 4 a.m. this morning, or 2 a.m. WA time, and then progressively easing back to a Category 2 system by 4 p.m. tomorrow, and then by 4 a.m. on Saturday, we're looking at a system that's around about a high-end Category 1, maybe low-end Category 2, and by the time it makes landfall, the JTWC do maintain cyclone status here of a system that is Category 1 at best. So let's take a look currently at what the general forecast is from the computer guidance, and we'll have a look at this very briefly here, and we'll have a look at it in a lot more detail when the subscriber update is up in the morning. But in general, we can see Tropical Cyclone Quang here. We've got gales particularly to its south and east. Now as we go to tomorrow night, we can see already the system being sheared apart, torn apart, but we still have gales, and you can see these gales impacting the coastline here, and we've got strong wind warning type winds anywhere to the west of, or to the south and west of Barrow Island. So you can see why the Bureau has put out the cyclone warning out into those regions. And once again, it's not because we're expecting a Category 4 system, it is because we could see some gales from the system on the coast as it's degrading on its approach. As we can go into the future here, by around about 10 a.m. Saturday, we've got the system, a fairly elongated, trophy type low pressure system, creating gales to the south, all the way south to Carnarvon, and strong winds to the east, all the way out towards Barrow Island. So even though it may not be a cyclone at that stage, it's still creating uncomfortable weather for that region. Now, by Saturday night is when we actually expect the landfall, or Saturday afternoon to Saturday night in WA time. We expect the landfall at this stage, as I mentioned, more than likely somewhere between Coral Bay and Exmouth is where the forecast generally shows us, but anywhere, you can't rule anything out from Onslow all the way west, all the way south to Carnarvon. But as I say, the favoured area at this point is around Exmouth to Coral Bay for that system to cross the coast. And as I mentioned, the more likely scenario out of this is that the system, by the time it does cross the coast, is not very likely to be a tropical cyclone. Rainfall for tomorrow, you can see most of the rainfall, the heavy stuff, is located offshore here, but we are starting to see some moderate falls of rain anywhere around that northwest Cape region. As we go to Saturday, we can see that the rainfall is now located onshore as the cyclone is approaching, or the low is approaching the northwest coast. And we can see here falls 25 to 50 millimeters in general. Don't be surprised if we see some heavier falls, particularly if the system does hold itself together a little bit better than what the current computer model guidance is showing us. The other big thing to note is that we're going to see some northerly air coming in along the rest of the Pilbara coastline, and so in that northerly air it's going to be dragging in a lot of moisture, tropical moisture. Remember how I showed you the precipitable water imagery and we saw this plume of moisture advecting into the cyclone? That plume of moisture is what's going to be creating some moderate falls of rain, possible as far east as about Pardue Roadhouse, and then as far south as just south of Carnarvon, almost to Shark Bay. So we could be seeing some reasonable falls of rain over a large area of this system, particularly if it isn't as centralized and concentric as a cyclone. So if it does weaken out into a ugly looking low, we're likely to see more rainfall in more parts of the district. By Sunday, everything breaks down. The trough itself begins to weaken, pushes inland, and also this northerly feed of moisture begins to weaken as well. So we start to see a decrease in rainfall along the Pilbara coast because of it. And by Monday, she's all over. Over to the east coast, and we've certainly got some very interesting things happening here. Now we're going to see gale force winds from around about tonight onwards on to tomorrow. We've got 25 to 35 knot winds across the southeast districts, and we can see just offshore is where the strongest winds will lie. Very complex pattern here, and the computer models are struggling a little bit to pinpoint centers of circulation, and so we've got one here and another one right over the top of the sunny coast tomorrow around lunchtime. So depending on which of those features comes off, or if both of these features comes off, the pattern becomes very complex as to where the strongest winds will lie. But it's needless to say, stay off the water and expect some very strong winds tomorrow. I don't think you need to be Einstein to figure that out. As we go into Friday night, you can see everything is starting to clear to the south by Friday night. So we've got all this really strong wind. We've got the possible load located right here over the Gold Coast, and then another one located out here well offshore. And as we go into Saturday, you can see pretty well that low is now over northeast New South Wales. We may have a secondary low pressure system located here. It's just a surface feature because of a surface trough further inland, but the significant feature is now weakened and moving southwards. So folks, in terms of rainfall, it's significant rainfall expected. Once again, you don't need me to tell you this, but just looking at the sort of time frames of the heaviest rainfall, you're likely to see the heaviest rainfall around the southeast starting around about 7 to 10 a.m. tomorrow, and we've got some very strong rainfall potential here over 3 hours of 25 to 50 millimeters in 3 hours. And the good thing about that really intense rain is that it is likely to be moving fairly quickly. Now by tomorrow afternoon we are likely to see falls of 100 millimeters plus between Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast, and moving as far west as Toowoomba, so you could be seeing falls there of 100 plus millimeters. And then as we go into tomorrow evening and overnight, you can see the clearance through Brisbane at around about 7 to 10 p.m. tomorrow night, and you can see the heavy rain now entering the Gold Coast region and then further to the south into northeast New South Wales. As I said to you, the great thing about this, though, even though we could see some flash flooding and some very heavy rainfall over 24 hours, is that the rainfall will move south fairly rapidly and will clear the southeast coast district of Queensland fairly rapidly, starting from around about tomorrow afternoon onwards. So once again, the actual overall model estimates are suggesting 100 to possibly 200 millimeters in the southeast coast district, anywhere from the border all the way north to just south of Hervey Bay. We're seeing the potential here, particularly around the Sunshine Coast initially, then Brisbane, and then the Gold Coast later on tomorrow. And if we go to your weekend, by Saturday, most of that activity is now cleared off. We've got some remnant shower activity, and then by Sunday, she's all skies clear for the whole state, and that will be the case then for an extended period, I would imagine. So it'll be beautiful and sunny all through Queensland for a long period of time. Thanks for watching this video update by OCC. We'll have another one for you tomorrow night. Subscribers, you'll have one in the morning as well, that will focus on the northwest WA tropical cyclone.